Day here in the studio with my counterpart, Brian Groves, and Patrick Frerick, the Assistant Director of Operations. So we are talking streets today. Our office, the Communications Office, we started the Streets webpage in May 2021, and that came along with a Streets report. Brian, you want to talk about the street report and the street webpage?
Sure. So, one of the questions we got, not only last year, but just frequently is what's going on with our streets? Why don't we know more about what is going on? And so all of us worked together with several other people in our organization to develop a street web page that was kind of like a one-stop shop for street information about projects and seal coating and anything you can think of for streets on the city side. We wanted people to be able to know. And so we created the website, and then we started doing a monthly street report, again with the three of us kind of mainly putting it together with some help from others to kind of say, these are the active projects, these are the future projects, this is what's been done. But that was really the goal of it, was to try to have a place that offered all of that information so people know what's going on when it comes to city streets.
So, and something that people need to know is that this isn't a cumulative list of all the projects going on. Patrick, you want to touch on that?
Yeah, for sure. We have a lot going on right now, and you see the streets reports and you see all of those projects, but there's a lot of thinking and coordinating that's going on in the background on future streets. We've gotten some money and we know some streets that are on the list, but those are only a select few streets in the city as a whole. So, and that's only talking about the reconstruction and the major rehab projects. We also have our street and bridge division that we're looking at from a seal code and a preservation perspective as well. So, as well as what do we do after the streets that are on the list? What do we do after that? And so there's a lot of coordination that's happening behind the scenes as well. The public doesn't need to know about because it doesn't necessarily affect them right now or in the very near future. But I mean, we are constantly looking ahead as to what's going on because it's a never-ending process, and it's going to be a never-ending process. So there is a lot of coordination and discussions that are going on in the background just to make sure that we are moving ahead progressively and we're doing it in the right way, and that we're going to be using our money and our resources the way that to have the best benefit and the most bang for our buck.
So a question that we get we've had it a lot, is that why do we do more than one project at once? Why can't the city just do one project and then move on to the other?
Well, projects are phased in, right? So there's a lot that goes into a project, and the very first thing is design. So we start designing projects. Like right now we have 2 projects in design. If we're talking just strictly streets, we're not even going to talk about water and sewer individual projects. So, Howard and then Edma, 29th, Glenna, those 2 are in the design phases right now. So we have to go through that design phase, which is typically a year to 18 months long, that we look at all the infrastructure that goes along with that. Once we get through with the design, now we got the bidding phase and the coordinating phase. Whenever we bid a project, we don't know what contractor is going to get the job. We don't know that when we go out for bid. What we rely on is once that contractor is selected, that their schedule and their coordination works so that street projects can move forward at a good pace. We do have a duration that we're contracted for streets projects, but we really rely on the contractor to work with us on that scheduling and when this project starts, so that they know what's currently in their queue and what they're working on, and that they have the resources so that our streets projects aren't delayed. So it's not necessarily the city's working on multiple projects at one time. Our contractors are working on multiple projects at one time, and what we've gotten, the reason we start multiple is because we've gotten word from them that they have the resources and the ability to work on both of those projects at the consecutively, and so that not one project is delayed and at the expense of the other project. So there's a lot of coordination. You see that with Rio Concho. Let's take that for example. We awarded Rio Concho midsummer. They're not going to start that until March of 2022. simply because that's when those resources are going to become available to do that project. So you have a 6-month delay there simply because of of us working with the contractor and coordinating that with them.
So talk about the process of selecting a contractor. A lot of times you hear people say, well, it's the lowest bidder. Is that always the case, that we select the lowest bidder, or do we select qualifications? What goes into all that process?
So, and that's kind of a misconception that a lot of people have. It's not necessarily the lowest bidder. It's the lowest quality bid. And so there's other factors that go along with that, coordination, scheduling, price is obviously one of the big factors, but you also have history with the contractor. If we have a good history with a contractor, there's a little bit more of a incentive to use them because we know that they're going to give us do a good job, and we know how they work with us. On the flip side, we do have contractors that we have a negative history on, and so that comes into play when they submit a bid too. So we may have an ultra low bid, but if we know that the citizens ultimately aren't going to get a good product from that contractor, we don't use them. We want to put out a good product. It gives us the best bang for your buck again, and the most longevity. So it's not necessarily the lowest price. There's a lot of factors that go in. Price is a big component of it, but when we're looking at a selection process, and again, it's a selection process on people who bid. So we can't go out there and we can't say, I want you to bid, I want you to bid, I want you to bid. All we can do is publish a bid for potential firms, potential contractors to go out, look at, and determine if they want to put a bid out there for us. And then we have to make a determination based on the number of whoever provided a submission of that bid. And a lot of times in our past few projects, it's been a single bidder. And there's been times where we anticipate that there's other bidders out there that want to put in, and they just couldn't get their numbers together or couldn't quite meet the time frames. And so we've gone back out for bid. Bell Street was one of those. We went back out for bid, with a little different phasing on the project to, hopefully garner some more interest in the bid. And it was ultimately Reese Albert was the only bidder again on that project. So we've kind of see that. Reese Albert's our local contractor. They do a lot of work around San Angelo. They do a lot of our projects. They do a lot of TxDOT projects. You'll see their yellow and red trucks everywhere, equipment everywhere, and they do really good work. And so they're one of those, positive history examples that we talked about earlier. But unfortunately, we would like, more submissions so we have a decision-making process. But in a lot of cases, that's taken out of our hands because there is a sole bidder on those projects.
Okay, so let's move into the most recent street report, the January one. First, we talk about the downtown Chadburn Street project. Can you give us any updates on that? The last we had was the striping operations were to begin soon. Where are we at with that?
Yeah, so we're still moving forward with that. The biggest movement right now that you're going to see on downtown Chadburn is they're getting started on the ramp. They've got their materials moved in, and they're going to start, laying the foundation for that ramp and getting some movement on that. And that's a big component of downtown Chadburn, of the project. That project was supported a lot by a grant, a pedestrian grant, and that ramp itself was a big component of getting that grant and being awarded it. So we're excited about getting that part going. But the striping operations, we're still expecting that to happen. We just got 2IG open. We got everything kind of in place now to where we can lay that stripe down, and it's going to be where it needs to be. So we're also working on the pedestrian lighting, getting that up and getting that tied in and lit up. So kind of those finishing touches. It's I don't know if you've ever built a house, but you see a lot happen all at one time, and then it feels like everything just stops. And there's a lot going on, but you can't see it. And that's kind of where we're at on Chadburn right now, is we saw a lot of movement, a lot of concrete, and a lot of big changes. And now it's those little things that seem like they take forever, but they take time. And so that's kind of where we're at on that project. But it is moving forward, and we're getting closer every day.
So, right now there's, a few blocks that have been done. Is that same kind of work going to be done all the way up to the loop, with the bricks and the concrete? Is that the plan? Is that to go all the way to the loop on Chadburn?
That was the plan. And again, we talked about how we coordinate projects and how we design projects. And this first 3-block section of Chadburn was really to set the standard for Chadburn to go all the way to the loop. So from the river to the loop is going to have that same look, that same feel, all the way down. There's a few more phases. So the next phase that we're looking at is to go from Beauregard down to College, and then from College to what I call the Chadburn S curve there by the bus station, and then take that Chadburn S and go all the way through North Chadburn. The big, storefront to storefront that you saw on these 3 blocks is going to stop at the loop, but North Chadburn will be a streets project and have a nice roadway moving all the way through the north side of Chadburn.
That's definitely one of the things we hear about a lot, with the downtown Chadburn project, which is great. But we have a lot of people that say, well, what about North Chadburn? So you said it's not going to be just like that. What kind of reconstruction or what kind of process, I guess, is North Chadburn going to be? So
a lot of those pet elements, new sidewalks and railings, and a lot of that was done, I think it was back in 2015 with the Freedom Grant. And so a lot of those sidewalk components have already been done all the way down to, I believe, 19th Street. So we're going to come in now and just refresh the street from there all the way out to 43rd Street by the Coliseum, so that those visitors that are coming into town and those users that are going out to the Coliseum for those events have a good street, as well as, obviously all the businesses and the storefronts that are along Chadburn have a nice roadway in front. It's just there's no need, as there was downtown, to do the storefront to storefront. That's an invasive project. You impact businesses tremendously, and we know that. And there's not a need to do that going all the way down Chadburn. So we're not going to impact businesses like that in that manner. We're just going to give them a good roadway that'll help people get to their store easier.
Will that be will it be the concrete construction that we saw, or will it be more of a mill and overlay? Or?
No, it'll be a mill and overlay.
Okay.
It'll be an asphalt street going back down. The profiles will change. Right now, there's the widths of the pavement go from 4 inches to 8 inches just based on different repairs and mill and overlays over the course of the years and everything. So all of that will be pulled back down, and we'll have a nice consistent elevation coming back down, but it will be hot mix moving from the loop all the way to 43rd.
So on that note of talking about street materials, something that I myself have asked and have had answered internally, but I've heard it from other people. Why, in some cities you see downtown often being brick streets. Can you answer for other people why we didn't choose to do all brick streets?
So it's obvious that the street, you want longevity in a street. Back in the day, brick streets is what they had available for materials. Today, we have much more quality materials, much more durable materials, concrete, even the asphalt that's being placed now. While there is an appeal aesthetically for bricks, functionally and and for the duration, it's not the best choice necessarily. If we did a brick street, it would involve a concrete underlayment that the bricks are then set on. So it's providing nothing more than just an aesthetic value at that point. The true structure would still be a concrete street as it is downtown. So, and you'll see in like downtown where we did stamps, we wanted that aesthetic value, but short of placing bricks that can pop loose and can crack, and we went ahead with the stamped and stained concrete in place of that gives you that same look and that same feel, but not necessarily the problems that come along with strictly using a brick structure. Again, I'm all about it. I think it looks awesome. I think the historical value is awesome there, but when we're looking at spending our money on it, it's really not the best product to put down at this point in this day and age. There's better products that'll last a lot longer than that.
Anything else you want to talk about downtown Chadburn?
I think the college intersection will see some of that same design, that star design. I think it's the last intersection that'll see that ultra decorative design in there, but everything else will be concrete storefront to storefront. So, yeah.
I do want to ask, and we've had this question, obviously can't be ignored. You see it. So one of the stars at the intersections is flat, and that's the one that's by the Fuentes. And then the other one is a bit raised. So can you explain what that's about?
100% drainage.
Okay.
It all has to do with water flow.
Right.
That in any crown in a roadway is for that purpose. It's to shed water and to flow water. It's just in the case of when you put a star in the middle of it, now you notice it, now you see it. But that's why that crown is there. It's 100% to get that water into the gutter line, into the flow line, so it gets off the roadway.
Okay.
That's why it's there, and it's necessary. I mean, obviously, we wanted to keep that profile as low as we could, but that's where it needed to be in order to keep the water in the right places.
Mm-hmm.
You know, I think one of the questions we get a lot is that the city, or question/statement is that the city chooses certain areas of town to work on more than others, that certain parts of town get more love than others. Is that taken into consideration when street projects are chosen, is that this side of town needs some love and this side of town needs some love? What goes into the process of selecting a street to be worked on?
Not the side of town. The side of town has nothing to do with it. What has everything to do with it is the quantitative values that go into that. How much traffic is there? What are the traffic patterns like? What is the condition of the street? You know, that's why in 2015 we did that street survey. Had a consultant come in. They drove every street in town, gave us a condition rating on the streets, so we had that quantitative data to make that decision off of, and that's what drove which streets were being going to be rehabbed through that $80 million that council gave us. So the side of town has nothing to do with what projects are being selected at the time. It's all about traffic patterns, existing condition of the roadway. Maybe there's other issues that are in play, like drainage and stuff like that needs to be addressed and come into that decision-making process. But no, it's all quantitative and justifiable as to where we work on when we do these projects.
And sometimes, like with MLK and then with downtown, it's motivated by grants. So is that correct? So those might jump on the list higher up because we got funding to do those types of projects.
Yeah, absolutely. And, you know, like you said, you know, Downtown Street, Chadburn, while it was at the forefront of all of our projects, that particular phase got moved up a little bit because we did have a grant to do all the pedestrian elements and move forward on that. That grant was only, that application period was so short. So we had to look at all of our projects that we had going on and say, you know, which of our projects have the most likelihood to be awarded this grant? And that was Chadburn. So obviously we pushed that one ahead a little bit to take advantage of that multi-million-dollar grant that helped push that project along. All it did was take another project and kind of moved it down the list a little bit. But, you know, MLK was another one that we had a pedestrian grant to do sidewalks and shared use lanes and stuff like that. That was a timing function as well. Granted, that road needed to be redone and it was top priority for us, but it wasn't number one. It was like number 3 or number 4. It got done first because of the condition of the road, as well as the opportunity for grants to come down and do some of those ped elements that needed to be done along that roadway as well.
Because at the end of the day, we can't work on streets if we don't have the funding to do it.
That's right, and 100%, and that's why when you look at like downtown Chadburn, there's multiple funding sources that went into that. Not only the bond funds, but there was a grant, you know, from a federal grant that went along with that. There was downtown San Angelo helped out with some of the money and the design and the construction of it. The Development Corporation, Costa DC, threw in some money to help spur that development and that rehabilitation downtown. So it all comes down to money, and you know, if we're going to talk about that, you know, when we're looking at that phase B and phase 3 of downtown, that's what we're in big discussions of right now, is how are we going to pay for the continuation of that project down? We have some good ideas and we have some identified funding sources for our portions of it, but we're also constantly looking at grant opportunities to continue that project down. I think the next round for that same PEG grant is coming up in this next year, so we'll be applying for that again to help go down. And it's kind of an ABC process, right? So we got this first grant and we started this PED design process. Well, now, in that next application, we talk about how we need to continue it. And without that continuation, this money isn't best utilized that you gave us. So we need to continue. And so we talk about joining in, the transit district and those bus routes and the multimodal type of connectivity with our pedestrian movements. And so that all comes into play into how we sell, how we apply, how we phase in our projects.
Well, thank you for that explanation.
Yeah.
Okay. All right, let's move on to Southwest. So we've made a lot of progress there, obviously, but there are some things that were set back. That low water crossing, can you explain why that was delayed and what happened there?
There were a number of delays on that low water crossing. We do all the due diligence that we can whenever we go into the design process of a street. And, the crutch of the matter is we don't know what is underground necessarily. We have a really good idea in a lot of cases, but unfortunately, you don't always know what's been placed there or exactly where it is or what's going to happen. So we saw that on that low water crossing of Southwest, when we
by McDonald's, if
by
anyone doesn't know
McDonald's.
that. So,
Yes.
Yeah.
If anyone, yeah. When we started digging and excavating, we came across a gas line that was just in the wrong place. We didn't anticipate it being there, and we completely had to work with that, Atmos and that franchise utility to move that, and we're kind of at their mercy to work with us in that. And they're really good about doing it and reprioritizing so that our project can keep going. But that created a delay.
So let me stop you real quick. So when you find other company utilities, the city or the contractor cannot move it. It is up to that company to move that. So
That's
you have
right.
to wait on them, like you
we
said.
do not touch them. And in fact, it's, that's a part of, so we have, I use the word franchise utility. So they pay for a franchise with the city, meaning they have the right to come in and use our right of way to put their infrastructure in. So Atmos, AEP, Concho Valley Electric, they all have franchise utilities with us. Part of that agreement is they have to come in and move that if we're doing a streets project and we need it moved out of our way. That's part of their responsibility in that franchise. So they have to come in and they move it. We're not going to touch it. Just like if you have a tree growing into the high line, we're not going to come trim that tree. We're going to get Sudden Link or AEP or whomever to come trim that tree. We play the liaison for those communications, but ultimately it's their infrastructure, it's their responsibility, and we don't want to touch it. We don't want to get into that. We're not gas people. We're not electric people.
I'd imagine moving a gas line is not as simple as just making cuts, moving it, and reassembling it. There's a lot that goes into that.
You're talking about pressures and and hazard. I mean, it's explosive, right?
Yeah.
That's what gas is. So we don't want to touch it. We're not trained in that. We do water, sewer, streets. We don't do gas. We don't do electric.
You don't want us to
fiber.
touch it. That's not what you're trained in.
You don't want us touching that.
Yeah.
Gotcha. So when they found that, that messed with the elevation of the new street. Is that right? And so that kind of, you'll have to go back to the drawing board to figure out the design of the level of the street. Is that right?
It moved the elevation of the box culverts that go under the street, which ultimately are a fixed distance, and they move the elevation of the street, which has a compounding effect all the way through that particular area. So, yeah, I mean, and that's, again, what you see with every project is kind of that you need some flexibility there, and you need some ability to make some decisions in the field. Everything can look good on paper, but ultimately, until you get in the field and you get it torn up and you start looking at it and put your hands on it, that's when the rubber meets the road, if you will, and you have to make those decisions that work amongst everything. And we can't just bully, a franchise utility into something. We have to coordinate and we have to work with them. So, they have their constraints and we have our constraints, and usually we compromise and come up with a workable solution for everybody. But yes, it did impact the elevations of that roadway, which impacted, how we feather in and how we tie in to that particular crossing. But yeah, and again, you see that in every project that we come. It's a known unknown that we're going to come into contact with something like that in a project.
How often do you guys do a street project and it goes completely 100% smooth with no surprises? Does that ever happen?
No, it doesn't. And I could say, well, not since I've been doing it, but I don't know that since anyone's been doing it that's been the case. There's always stuff that you come across, and thankfully that's why you have intelligent people managing the projects and working on the projects so that they can look at it, figure out the pros and the cons and the benefits and the takeaways from each option that's on the table, and make the best decision on them. So that's why we hire competent contractors, and that's why we have engineering staff on board and with the city, and we take it's not a knee-jerk reaction. There's a lot of thinking that's involved whenever we do have to flex on a project, because ultimately it does have repercussions all the way down the project. You can't just change an elevation without thinking about what's that going to do to water flows. Is that going to now create a pond or create a hazard in this roadway? Is the water still going to continue to flow? What is it going to do? And is it going to back water up into somebody's property, or, and now cause a problem for somebody that didn't have a problem before? There's a lot that goes into that decision-making process.
Well, I'm assuming that's why when you bid out a project, and part of that budget is a contingency fund. Is it for unforeseen things that all of a sudden are going to need something to pay for it in order for the project to continue and move forward? That's
exactly right. I mean, you miss quantities on the bid. It's just it's the fact of the matter. I can't get you down to the penny of what this particular thing is going to cost. And then you come across the unknowns, and you got to do something with them. You can't just expect the contractor to take care of it. That it's their time, it's their labor, it's their expense, and ultimately they should be compensated for that. And that's what contingency is for. It's for that part of the project that we don't know what's going to come up. We know it's going to come up, we just don't know what it is.
So something else that has impacted multiple of street projects is manpower issues, and then also supply issues. Can you talk about let's first talk about the supply issues. When you're doing concrete on like Southwest and Bell Street, and getting some of the supplies that finish those projects, that's caused some of the delays. Can you talk about the ins and outs of that?
And I hate going in there because it almost sounds cliche now. Oh, well, you have supply issues. It just seems like that's the norm and that's the go-to response, but it's true. We do. It's beyond our control. Whenever Ingram has a cement issue, we can't get concrete at that time. If we can't get concrete, the project can't move forward. I mean, it has to be sequential. It has to be phased in. And it's a delay, and it's beyond our control. I mean, we can thump the table as much as the city wants to, but ultimately, if the supply of cement's not there to produce the concrete that goes in the road, there's nothing we can do about it. We're relying on those plants to provide that raw material so that we can ultimately get the end product that we need. Labor issues are obviously the norm. COVID, kicked us pretty hard, as it did everybody. We see those labor issues not only internally but with our contractors, and so while it sounds like an excuse, it's not. It's reality. And we, again, have to have that flexibility. And that's why we have terms of a contract that say Bell Street's going to take 4 years for real. And yeah, it's because of these things that we know are going to happen. Granted, we could have never predicted that it would have impacted us, at the extent that it did these past 2 years. But we know that there's going to be delays and things that happen that's beyond our control. And supply issues are one of those.
How many, when it comes to manpower, and this may be too down in the weeds, but how many people does it take to do a concrete section? Like, it's not just the three of us. It's a whole crew of people on the ground in the truck doing a number of different things at once. And if one of those people is missing, I'm assuming it's hard to find a replacement.
Well, yeah, it slows down, and you can't just. A lot of those are skilled labor. You can't just grab a guy off the street and say, "Go finish concrete." it's a skill that goes along with that to make that smooth, because I'm sure everyone's seen that portion of a concrete slab that holds water whenever it rains. Mm-hmm. Well, it's because there's a dip in that concrete. Well, to keep that dip out of there it takes skill. And while it may look like a very rudimentary process and a very easy thing to do from the Joe Citizen driving by, there's a lot that goes into it, and there's a lot that goes into not only just making it flat and smooth, but then making sure that it cures the right way so that it doesn't crack and it doesn't have a structural issue as it moves on. Concrete's not done when it hits the ground. For the next 28 days, that concrete's live, and it's curing out, and it's getting harder, and even beyond that, I mean, for the next year or so, concrete is truly curing. It's structurally sound in that 28 days, or even a little quicker if you use the right stuff. But if that one guy is moving or is missing, or the driver doesn't show up at the concrete company. And that's the thing. I mean, you have a contractor that we're working with. They have a subcontractor who is a concrete finishing crew who is ordering concrete from a different company who is using a different company to deliver their raw materials. And so, while we say it's a city project, there's umpteen different entities involved in that to ultimately get us concrete or asphalt that we can put on the ground. And, each business has its own priorities and its own controls, and we can't necessarily control that.
So I heard you say the word curing several times. We saw that with Southwest, and I live over by there, so I saw it as well. You have the curing of the concrete that people drive on, but I think what a lot of people experience, especially from that Tractor Supply to Cavender's, was the kind of the base of that just looking like dirt and sitting there for days. And I know we got several messages, why isn't anyone working there? They haven't been working there for days. Can you explain that process and why it's important? And if it rains on it, you have to start that process over. Is that right?
Right. And so that's kind of the difficult thing about a lot of these projects is so much goes into what you can't see. Everyone sees the road that goes on top, but that's really the last thing that we're concerned about. We can fix the road on top. It's everything underneath that really makes or breaks a road. And so whenever we design a project, and in the case of Southwest down there by the dealerships in Hotel City, it's that those soils there were unstable, that material there didn't have a good structure to work in. So what we do is we add in cement into that base structure to give it some more rigidity and provide a better base structure for that asphalt, which is flexible to sit onto. If that base is flexing, asphalt flexes and it cracks and it breaks. And so we had to ensure that base structure is sound. And there's different products you can use: cement, lime, liquid asphalt, just depending on the design and what you're trying to achieve there. But that's exactly what you saw. So we incorporated cement into that base material. Well, it's just like letting a concrete slab harden up. We had to let that harden up. We couldn't put something on top of it that then sealed it up and didn't let that curing process happen, because if we would have gotten on that and drove on that prior to that setting up and hardening, all we would have done is taken what would be a semi-rigid material and cracked it. And now we're no better off than what we were. We just wasted our money by putting in a material that didn't do anything for us. So we had to wait. We had to give it time. We had to let it cure out before we could drive equipment back on it again to actually lay the roadway. So it looks like we're just, not working, but we're working. We're just letting the material do the work for us.
There's a process.
Yes, there is a process.
Gotcha.
Okay, let's move on to Bell Street. I think that is probably the number one project we get asked about the most. So, would you attribute the timeline of that project mainly, number one, is it really delayed? And two, do you attribute it to the manpower and supply issues, or what are the main factors going into?
And ultimately, we have a contracted period for Bell Street, and it was about 4 years. And so if you're looking at it from the legal aspect, and no, that project is not delayed. In fact, we're still ahead of schedule on that project. What you saw was a big sludge of movement initially. You know, we got a lot done, and we're blowing, and we're going, and we're doing good, and then all of a sudden we did hit those supply issues and those manpower issues. Our contractor is the same it's Reese Albert, the same contractor that's working on Southwest. And so when they got slapped with manpower issues, now they're having to coordinate concrete crews, and with, you know, a concrete going in on Southwest and concrete going in on Bell Street, like we talked about earlier, you got to have the right number of people and the right resources to make those projects happen. And unfortunately, whether there was a manpower or a material supply issue or whatever, we had to kind of prioritize those projects at a time and kind of keep both of them moving at the same time with the limited resources that we had. We did have a small issue where, we talked about the funding problem earlier, and, out at the airport, there was some, they had some monies that were going to expire. And so Reese Albert had to kind of readjust and reprioritize to take advantage of that monies. And so it impacts us. And unfortunately, there's a finite number of people, of crews, of resources, and you just have to coordinate that as best you can and keep everything going. But the project is ahead of schedule. We are moving forward. We still expect it to finish ahead of schedule. We want to see it done as much as anybody else does. We're ready to see that final product as well. We're excited for that, but they're still within what they're allowed to work in, and that doesn't say that we as a city just says, oh well, they're good, they can go disappear for several months. No, it's not like that. There's a lot of coordination, a lot of discussion with that contractor, communicating from our side to them, saying we need to see progress. We need to see a continuation of this project. You can't just disappear. It is impacting our citizens and our businesses and everything that uses that corridor. So you can't just stop. There's a give and take there. And so that's kind of what you see on Bell Street, Southwest, all the projects that are going right now is that give and take. But it is still moving forward. And like I said, we want to see it done, and we're excited to get it done ahead of schedule. So,
well, and of course, Bell Street is not solely just the street portions of that. We also, replaced water and sewer lines and moved those out of the roadway, which took time as well. So it's been a big project that took a lot of time because there was a lot of work going on. So on Bell Street, what everybody sees is that last strip over near the sports complex.
Right.
So I think the big question that we get all the time is, you only have that strip left. Why can't you just finish that strip? But then once that is done, there's still other elements of the project that have to be done. And that's one of the reasons why there's a longer end date, is because you have other items that people aren't going to see, similar to like what you're seeing on downtown Chadburn. Do you want to talk about what those are on Bell Street?
Right. Again, it's the punch list and those smaller things, the striping. We still got to rework all the we're getting a brand new signal there at Rio Concho and Bell Street. So once you see that intersection poured, you will see a signalized intersection work going in place. You'll see those striping operations. And again, it's not just we're going to get in there and we're just going to pour concrete down in Rio. I mean, there's underground conduit that needs to be placed, and tie-ins and sidewalks and ramps and all of those type of elements that go into that. It's not as simple as just pouring concrete on the road. I wish it was, but it's not.
So we're just talking about Bell Street. Rio Concho Drive is about to come up, which is right next to Bell Street. Can you talk about that?
We're excited about the Rio Concho Drive project because that was a project that it's not in our bond project list to be done. It's a project that obviously needs to be done, but we had zero money for that. Over the course of the last 3, maybe 4 years, kind of through some savings in our operational budgets, we were able to carry that money over and accumulate finally enough money to take a lick at reconstructing that project. Unfortunately, it's not just a simple mill and overlay project, because while we could have done that, we wouldn't have had a good product. We didn't have enough money to do a reconstruction project, which goes down and replaces all the base material of that road and puts a brand new street on top. We couldn't afford that. So that project is actually giving us an opportunity to try a different technique that we haven't used in this city, which is FDR, full depth recycling. And so what that does is a machine comes in and it grinds up the base material and the roadway at the same time, grinds it all together, incorporates some kind of additive. In this case, it's going to be cement and some asphalt bitumen, to create a solid base structure then that our asphalt can then be laid on top of. The beauty of that is we're using what's existing to create the base structure. So it's like a full depth reclamation where we take everything out and bring brand new stuff in and put it in, but we're not bringing in new stuff. We're reusing what's there, making it better, and then going to put it on top. And what we found was, and it was verified in the bid when we got the bids back, is we can do that process for substantially cheaper, get a similar product to a full reclamation project, and have a good roadway that's going to last for the duration. It's exciting for us because we're kind of proving that process out. If it proves out, there's umpteen roadways in the city then that we could potentially use that same process on to either take care of a roadway that we didn't have money to do before, or to kind of enhance a roadway project that we already had on the books and take it from a mill and overlay to this process, spend just a little bit more money and get a substantially better road. So we're excited to see this project. We're excited to see what the result's going to be and go through. And I think that's one of the notes that you really need to be aware of right now is our current council has empowered us tremendously moving forward. They made streets our priority, and it shows not only in their words but their actions. They gave us money. They're providing us resources. This is giving us opportunities to try stuff that hasn't been. This is the way we've always done it. We're getting to try some of those new techniques and new processes and more advanced applications to make our streets better, to get us a better product, and to move forward and get that street infrastructure that everyone's concerned about in a better shape.
Well, and I was about to give you all kudos, and I give council kudos as well, because you guys are trying to think outside of the box and not just the normal street things that we always do, is trying to find new ways to make our streets better that could ultimately save us money. So kudos to you guys for doing that.
Well, I appreciate that. And you see it not only in our streets reconstruction and rehab projects, but our street preservation and our maintenance projects as well. We've been able to use high density mineral bond, or HA5, in several areas instead of chip seal. That's a product that in this last council, staff looked at it, we evaluated it, we talked to some municipalities that have been using it as a replacement to some chip seal. And so it didn't have a lot of the negatives that come along with chip seal. And so council, even though we had never used it before, and it's not what we've always done, we were able to throw it down, take a look at it, evaluate it on our streets, in our application. It proved itself out. So now we're coming into our third year of using that product on the roadways that it's a candidate for. And so again, it's just that progressive thinking, that allowance to trust staff and trust our expertise and trust our research that we've done to give us a good product that ultimately the citizens are happy with. And that's our ultimate goal, is make the citizens happy. I mean, that's what we're here for. We're a service organization. We serve, we do work, but ultimately it's so you don't have to call us and tell us about a pothole. So you don't have to call us and tell us that the road's horrible in this area. So you can call us and say, hey, thank you, good job, the streets are good, and we can tout that. I mean, we want to have that kudos, especially when we're comparing ourselves to our sister cities. I mean, we want to be on top, and that's kind of what we're striving for, is to have the best roadways in amongst all of our peer cities, and that's our ultimate goal.
So you said a buzzword in there. I don't know if you caught it, Lorelei. Seal coating. Do we get asked about seal coating or comments about seal coating a lot on social media?
I think we do, Brian.
So can you explain why seal coating is an important tool in our toolbox, and that we're not doing that as a street reconstruction, but it has its place in street maintenance, and explain why we use that and why we don't use that for street reconstruction.
So there's two categories that need to be defined. There's street maintenance and there's street rehabilitation. Rehabilitation is to make the road better. Street maintenance is to keep the road in the best shape possible. Seal coating is a street maintenance application. And bang for your buck, you get the best product for the money as far as street preservation and keeping that roadway sound. It's an amazing process. It's been proven over decades and decades of use. It does what it's supposed to do, which is seal up the cracks, give you some texture on the pavement to drive on and the skid resistance. It does all of those things. Unfortunately, it's not a very popular application with the public. You do have loose rock, you have sticky tar in some cases. It's a disruptive process. It's a loud and, obnoxious process. You're using hot material that can impact different things, and it extends for even months beyond the project. The contractors come in, they've done their application, they moved on. Well, now the rock starts shelling off, and that loose rock starts accumulating in your driveway, and you can't walk on it. And we know that, and we try to sweep and we try to keep that rock removed, but ultimately, that's one of the downsides to using chip seal, and we know it. We hear about it all the time. We don't like getting those phone calls, so we've looked for some alternatives to that on roadways that apply. Not every roadway is going to be a candidate for a different application than seal coat or chip seal. Some roadways, that's the only thing that can go down on there, short of just completely rehabbing the street, and so you're going to see it. It does provide a structural component to the roadway. We use the word two-course chip seal in a lot of cases, and that's basically creating an asphalt layer to drive on for low traffic, low impact type of scenarios, in place of using a hot mix mat to drive on. But again, we've looked at some alternatives, HA5 and some other alternatives in areas that have candidate streets for chip seal. One of the things that we're kind of excited about is council gave us a goal to chip seal every street in town on an 8-year rotation. This year's year 7 for that. Next year's year 8. So we'll be circling back to those streets that we did year 1, and we get to take a look at those and start noting how well that program worked. And it may be a case where now we can come back with some of these alternatives now and put it on there if failures and cracks haven't developed on that roadway. So maybe now coming through some streets that weren't candidates for these alternative applications before may now be through this 8-year cycle. So kind of excited about looking at the next 8 years of that goal and what we're going to be able to do in that.
We just had seal coating done in my neighborhood, and I can remember 7 or 8 years ago whenever they did it the first time, and it was interesting to see it reapplied this time and to notice over all that time period just how much the rock got grinded down and what the new rock looks like. So when you say that, it'll be interesting to see what the streets look like. It was interesting on ours because it looked completely different when the seal coating came around again. So.
Right. And it does. I mean, asphalt's a live material. Obviously, with the heat and the cold and it moves and it flexes, and through the traffic, the kneading of the traffic, all of that changes that street structure over time, and you will see that rock embed more or release, and it's a live project. That's why I say it's never going to be done. It's just how do we preserve what we got and carry forward. So we have preservation money and maintenance money, and then we have rehab money. So our goal is, and you'll see it in these coming years, the MLK Boulevard and the College Hills that we rehabbed, and even there by Sam's and Southland, some of these asphalt streets that we just spent a whole bunch of money on 3 years ago. It's time to do something else to them so that we preserve what we did 3 years ago. As soon as that asphalt hits the ground, it starts deteriorating, and it has a deterioration curve. Well, our goal is to keep that curve from going straight down, flatten it out, maybe even bring it up a little bit, and kind of give it this roller coaster wave pattern to give it a longer life. And so I know we're going to get the comment of, well, they just fixed that road. There's other roads out there that need something on them. Why are they doing something to here again? It's to protect our investment on that roadway. The last thing we want to do is go spend $7 million on MLK, redo it all, and in 10 years it's gone because we didn't do the maintenance that we needed to do on that roadway. We'd rather spend a few extra dollars to keep it going and extend it out to 30, 40 years than have it fail in 10, 15 years.
All right, Patrick, a big one is College Hills. Tell us about where that's at. I know it's scheduled for bid January 18th. Is it currently?
It's still out for bid right now. We get it back on the 3rd, I believe. Again, we'll get to see who's interested, who's not.
It's exciting.
Hopefully we have people interested in it and willing to throw a bid out there for us. And I say hopefully because it's a big project. There's a lot that's going into this project. There's water work, there's sewer work, there's underground storm sewer that's going in, or drainage work that's going in. There's a couple of different alternatives for the street structure, whether we go with a RCC or a concrete type of street, or we go in with asphalt. So there's still a lot that's up in the air as far as the decision making on that project, based on where the numbers come in and where the bids come in. But man, if we hear about a street, it's College Hills. Where are y'all at? What are y'all doing? And the difficulty with College Hills is that flooding of College Hills component of it. If we were to go in and spend $20 million on a project on College Hills and redo the street and redo the water and the sewer lines, and it still floods every time it rains, and you still can't drive on it, and you still can't, I just don't think it would have been deemed a successful project at that point. And so we had to take a look at the drainage component of it, and what can we do about the water that's on the roadway? Well, ultimately what that meant was we put the water under the road with a brand new culvert system, underground box culvert system that's going to convey that water under the road, from all the way from the loop down to the arroyo. You can imagine the price tag that comes along with that. And that was one of the delays of College Hills, as we talked about grants. And we had applied for a grant to do that underground infrastructure specifically. And so we kind of had to put our design process on hold to see if we got that money, if we didn't, because that 100% affected the route we were going to take. We didn't get the grant, unfortunately. We didn't get that grant, but then council stepped up and said, you know what, we have these federal monies that was allocated to us. We can use them. We're going to give you $8-ish million to take care of that underground infrastructure, get it in the project. So council wanted to see that component of it done. Because the alternative was we do the project, we get a new roadway, it's smooth to drive on, but it's still impassable whenever it rains. So council said, we don't want that. Here's some money that's available. Allocate it to that underground infrastructure and let's get it going. So we were able to move forward on the design process, get it done. Now it's out for bid, and now we get to see what happens with the bids and hopefully start that project very, very quickly and start some work. It's gonna kind of be one of those Bell Street type projects.
That's what I was gonna ask. From a scope, is this bigger than Bell Street? I
don't want to say it's bigger than Bell Street, but there's a lot of coordination that's going to have to happen in it. We got to move water lines. We got to move sewer lines. We got to move electrical infrastructure. We got to move fiber infrastructure. We're putting sidewalks down the roadway, which is going to take some landscaping and coordination, driveway coordination with homeowners and stuff like that. So phasing wise, there's a lot that's going to go into here. On that north side, kind of going from the Arroyo up toward Avenue N and HEB. That side's going to move a little quicker. We're going to be hitting the infrastructure of that, the water and the sewer, mainly the water infrastructure of that, really hard, because that's one of our worst areas. Mm-hmm. And you see it if you drive down it, right? It's super rough. There's tons of patches in that area. It's because the water lines are old. They need to be replaced. And so we're going to prioritize that section, get that section done, and get those water lines replaced so we're not chasing leaks and people have water, and replace the sewer infrastructure at the same time as we come down. But then when we hit that lower side that comes from the loop down to the Arroyo, there across Sunset and that area, that's going to take a while. We not only have to move the water and the sewer lines deeper to accommodate this box structure. Now we got to put the box structure in. We got to build everything up around it. We've got to tie it all in and then do the street on top of that. So it's going to take a lot. And one of our goals in any project is to phase it to where it has as little impact on people as possible, and still lets the project move forward. That's, it's kind of, if you want to go back to Southwest, that's why we closed that intersection down completely, is because the contractor said we can either close the intersection down completely and get it done, or we can phase it in and it's going to take, 3 times as long for us in this area, and we're going to charge you 3 times as much to do it. Because that's their time, right? I mean, and they should be compensated for that. But so ultimately, we made the decision. We have a good detour route. Let's shut it down. Let's get them in and out, and let's move on. But College Hills is going to be the same way. We're going to try to phase that in to where people aren't impacted. People are going to be impacted. It's going to take a long time. It's a 3-year project once construction starts, and so but ultimately, 3 years compared to 50 years of life it's a small percentage, but for that 3 years, and it's going to be tough.
Yeah, I think that's something that we try to help people keep into perspective, is that yes, the road work is inconvenient, but hopefully the end goal is going to be worth it. And I know when I first moved here, everyone was always avoid College Hills when it rains, because it floods, and so when you think about that and you think about all the water that comes down and meets there, it's going to be a lot. The amount of work that goes into to figure out how to send that water where it needs to go, that's quite the process.
Yeah, it is. And that's kind of the crux of College Hills, is we are putting an infrastructure in the ground. We are doing all these improvements. It's still going to flood. It's in certain rain events, that water is still going to overtop the road right there at the Arroyo, and it's still going to be impassable. The goal is to 90% of the rain that we get in town, you're still going to be able to drive it. But we know moving forward that it's going to flood. And the problem is to do an infrastructure that would be passable 100% of the time, we simply can't afford it. It's a full bridge structure that goes over the top. And now it's not just building a bridge. That expands all the way out into the neighborhood, several blocks into the neighborhood, as you have to reconstruct the elevations of those streets to tie in. So it wasn't feasible to do that. We got as much capacity to flow under that road as we could, with the elevations and as little impact to the side streets as we could. Tried to maximize it, but ultimately we do know that water will overtop, and we will get calls about it, and we understand that, but it's kind of again, bang for your buck type of thing.
Okay, moving on. Do you want to touch on Sunset Drive? I know something that we've gotten asked is that southwest intersection. Why isn't it done? The Sunset Southwest intersection?
Sunset is part of our projects that's coming up. We're looking at firms, trying to figure out which firm we want to design that. It looks like we just skipped over that intersection right there, but we're going to be taking care of that intersection in the Sunset project. Kind of goes back to what we talked about earlier, was it's about grants. So we've applied for a grant to rehab and get money to help us reconstruct that intersection from a safety component. So we needed it. We're kind of holding tight. We didn't want to spend all our money doing it if we can spend someone else's money to do it, obviously. And so that intersection will be reconstructed, but Sunset's another one of those big projects that's going to go all the way from the Loop to Foster Road. And so it's coming down the pipe. We're going to start the design process. Like I said, we have Howard and Edmond that are ahead of it in schedule, but it's the next one that's going to start the design process.
Do we know yet what kind of process it'll be, or is that, I guess, too early to tell since we're still in design, whether or not it'll be mill and overlay or concrete?
It'll be a mill and overlay.
Okay.
Yeah, and the reason we can say that with confidence is because of that. In the street study we did in 15, that was a part of what determined. It looked at all the failures and it gave us an indication of what we can do in that roadway. And at that time, it was a candidate for mill and overlay. And when you talk about the difference you're talking a mill and overlay is $150, or I'm sorry, a mill and overlay is like $35, $40 a square yard. When you talk about reconstruction, the other alternative, you're talking about $150 to $160 a square yard. That's a big difference in price tag. And so that's why the street study was important, and that's why we really want to be selective on where we're doing those reconstruction projects and only put that money into where it needs to be done. What we don't want to do is spend $35, $40 a square yard on a mill and overlay project that needed a reconstruction project, and now it's just money wasted because we're not going to get the longevity out of that money that we need. So, but Sunset is one of those it's a candidate for mill and overlay. It just needs a new top. It needs to be smoothed up. The base structure is still relatively good. Even in a mill and overlay project, we have a process called proof rolling. And when we strip that top section off, we'll come in with a roller and we'll roll it and we'll watch what that base structure does. If it moves around, we may do some spot reconstruction in that area. But if it's solid, it supports that roller, supports that impact, we know it's still in sound condition, and we can just put an asphalt layer back on top of it. So there is a proving out portion of even a mill and overlay project that, again, we get to use that contingency money, go in, reconstruct that portion that we know would fail if we just put a topping on it. And so we have a good roadway all the way through.
Yeah, I think we saw that exact process that you're talking about with Southwest when they did the mill and overlay process on that. I remember when I was out filming that you could see the base, and they were waiting to see, because Winter Storm Uri had just happened, and so they were waiting to see how the base reacted and if they needed to go, if there were any cracks or anything like that. So you hit on something I think is really important, is that choosing what method for what street is not a coin flip or a personal choice. You're trusting the data from the street. Help me, I can't think of the word.
The Fugro study?
Yes, thank you.
And that was what we heard. That was the biggest criticism that we heard whenever we spent the money on the Fugro study, was we know what streets need to be fixed. Yeah, we know what streets need to be fixed, but to what extent? That was the value of the Fugro study. Not only to point at Bell Street and say Bell Street needs to be redone. Yeah, we know, we got that. We know College Hills needs to be done. We know MLK needed to be redone, but to what extent? MLK was a good example. There was a portion of MLK that we simply got away with a mill and overlay on because the base structure was good. But then moving more toward the north, we had to do a full recon on that portion. So instead of spending $135 or $150 a square yard all the way through, we were able to use some savings and make that money go a little further by doing just a simple mill and overlay process on that. So it's that quantitative component of it instead of just being selective or subjective, and saying, let's just go in here and do this on this roadway. No, we're really using the data and making a determination. You see it on our projects on Howard and Edmond. We'll go through, and you may have seen it, we core drill and we pull a sample of that road and that base structure out at critical points along that roadway, just to ensure ourselves that a mill and overlay will work in here, or do we need to do a more a more enhanced rehab on that particular roadway. So again, we're trying to prove that out, and we're trying to make sure that we're using our money wisely on all of that. But it's all part of the process.
Okay, Patrick. So I think people don't always realize that some of our major roads aren't actually under the city's jurisdiction. They're actually going to be TxDOT.
Mm-hmm.
I want you to definitely touch on that. Tell us about them.
So, we're kind of unique in that sense that not every road that's in the city is our responsibility. We do share a lot of that responsibility with the state or TxDOT. Bryant Boulevard, Sherwood, Knickerbocker, Avenue L or Chadburn Street down to Avenue L as you come into town, 208 and 19th Street. There's several segments of roads throughout town that are TxDOT's responsibility. They maintain them, they perform maintenance on them, they do all the striping and the rehab and all the expenses that go along with those roadways. The city does have some responsibility on them. We take care of all the timing and the traffic signal control on them, and so we phase those traffic lights in, and we maintain the structures, even though they're on a TxDOT roadway. But from a roadway and drainage component, TxDOT's responsible for that. So, if you call and say there's a pothole on Sherwood Way, and we say it's not ours, we're not just trying to avoid work. It's truly TxDOT's responsibility to take care of that. Mm-hmm. We do pass that information on to TxDOT, and similar to if they get a call, they pass it down to us as well. So we work very closely with TxDOT in all of our projects. A lot of our projects touch TxDOT roadways, and when we do that, when we touch TxDOT right away, there has to be a coordination with them, and so we have a good working relationship. From what I understand, the city's relationship with our local TxDOT office is much, much better than a lot of municipalities and their local TxDOT office. We know each other by name. We meet on a regular basis, and we coordinate really well with each other. So it helps our projects out. It gives us, it definitely makes it easier. But, we got to draw the line somewhere. I don't want to use our citizens' money and detract from what is our responsibility to go take care of a roadway that they have funding and they have money to take care of, and vice versa.
Okay. Anything else that you want to add?
I want to speak to our crews a little bit that are out there, our street and bridge crews, because they work hard. They are not in a very pleasurable environment. They're in the cold, they're in the heat, they're working with hot material, they're working on a hot roadway in the middle of traffic, and so those guys really do a bang up job for what they're given to work with. It's not fun work, it's hard work, but what's interesting is they take pride in that. They have a lot of pride. You'll see on their own personal Facebook pages where they post a picture of a patch that they did or something like that, and they pat themselves on the back, and they deserve that. And a lot of times what we get back is you got 5 guys here and they're not doing anything and they're working, but there's a process that each of those people have a responsibility. Even if some of that responsibility is giving the guy a break that's been using a shovel in the middle of summer for 30 minutes straight, that may be his job, is to take the shovel away from the guy, give him a break, let him rehydrate, and let him recover a little bit, so we keep our people safe. They do an amazing job. I'm super proud of them. We do have a lot of vacancies in that department, and I kind of like to put it in perspective when we talk about our street and bridge group. We have 30 individuals in that group. We have over 1,200 lane miles of roadway in San Angelo. So if you kind of break it down, 30 into 1,200, you're looking at one person is responsible every year for a lane of road, or the road from San Angelo to Ballinger. That's what each individual street and bridge employee is responsible for every year. It kind of, when you stretch it out in that regard, could you imagine walking from here to Ballinger every day, taking care of fixing that road every year? Puts it in perspective with just the resources that we have and the magnitude and the responsibility that's in front of those guys. And like I said, it's not easy work, but they do a really good job. We do have the list of potholes and work that needs to be done. They are also responsible for prepping ahead of all of our seal coat and HA5. So you see all the little black squiggly lines on the road, all the crack sealing process. They do all of that. They go in and they cut out the asphalt and do repairs. When you have a water line blow up and the water department comes in and fixes that line, our street and bridge guys come in and they do the patchwork of the roadway on top of that. So there's tons of stuff to do, but that's not all we do. That's our core service, right? And so what those guys are also tasked with is going and helping out the fire department when there's a major fire and we got to, pull the structure down, or we got to, doze a fire lane around an area that's burning, or we got to go help the fire marshal's office with the clean out of a dangerous building or a drug infested building. We got to clean all that out, and that involves hazmat suits, and you're dealing with needles and that kind of hazard. And we're also the boys with the big toys. So anytime someone needs help, either internally with the city or helps need move something or help repair this, or we get called and we help out in that regard too. So they do a lot. They do a lot over there. A lot of it again is kind of behind the scenes there, but they are proud of their work. It's a great group of guys over there. They love what they do. And we see it. Yeah, we do have some vacancies and whatnot in that department, but our core group has been there. They've been there a long time. We've retired several people out of that group that have been there for 20 years in the street and bridge division, 30 years in the street and bridge division. So they take a lot of pride in what they do, and they deserve a kudos and praise for working as hard as they do.
Definitely.
Well, we're certainly appreciative of our street and bridge crews and your whole division. Well, anything else?
I think we're good.
Okay. All right. Well, Patrick, thank you so much for being here
No
today,
problem.
for all the information you gave.
No, it's good.
It.
It's nice to get a little insight into really what goes on. I mean, everyone sees it, but there's a lot of coordination that happens behind the scenes and a little insight into the world. So.
Yeah.
Yeah.
We appreciate it.
Yeah,
Thank you.
no problem.
Okay.
Appreciate the opportunity too.
Yeah. Okay. For more information about streets, you can go to cosatx.us/streets.